With Marvel dominating the moviescape and several DC titles running as successful shows, not to mention adaptations from other imprints, it's hard to imagine a time when comic book content seemed to permanently exist on the razor's edge of fading away. Do you remember a time when a superhero movie not being great was considered the end of the genre? That's where things were in 1987, when Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, managed to make Superman 3 better because at least it had Richard Pryor in it. 2 years later, Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson, and Tim Burton came to the rescue with a Batman movie set in an Art Deco Gotham. Joel Schumacher might have buried it all over again with his fourth entry in the franchise like Superman before him, save for another Bruce. Bruce Timm, who adapted the Burton-style Batman into a style stamp all its own, a sort of neo-noir or dark deco, a play on Art Deco and film noir with a mixture of modern elements blended in. The simple yet compelling design and voice talents like Kevin Conroy as Bruce Wayne and Batman and Mark Hamill's Joker made Batman the Animated Series an instant classic and for a generation, the definitive Batman. That series and the new adventures of Batman that followed, along with Superman, Justice League, and Static Shock, became the gold standard of animated comic book adaptations. So you'd think that Batman Beyond was a product of that success, the hitmakers given free rein to continue the delivery of those golden eggs. Talking to IGN, Bruce Timm and the creative team behind the DC Animated Universe tell a different story. In 1997, Timm and company were brought into the WB head offices and given one simple directive. They wanted a teenage Bruce Wayne. No thing is too perfect that someone won't come along and break it. Youth-oriented shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Dawson's Creek, and Felicity ruled the day. The idea was that Gen X was broke and wouldn't buy anything as they age up, but millennials who were just coming of age might have money. Anyway, Bruce Timm and his team were faced with a task of taking a terrible suggestion and making something watchable out of it. They spent the last half-dozen years building up a canon based on one of the best rogues galleries in comics, and they weren't eager to just dump all of it. The solution eventually seemed clear. Instead of a teenage Bruce Wayne, they'd jump forward 40 years and have a geriatric Bruce Wayne and a teenage Batman in the form of Terry McGinnis. The team had managed to take the unwanted suggestion as a way to work out some other creative issues. The look of Batman and its related shows had become so iconic and recognizable, it also started to become a bit of a trap for the artists. Designing a future Gotham and a future Batman, they were able to pull from other influences like cyberpunk, itself a style that combines noir elements with near-future technology. The result was an animated series that continued on from the existing animated universe with a genetic link to the original, but its own look and feel. Anyone who thought making Batman younger would push the Dark Knight into Caped Crusader Batman and Robin territory was in for a shock, as the future only got darker for Gotham. While the studio approved Timm's pitch immediately, over time, the WB's standards and practices really did not, objecting to the dark nature of the show. The big trick, of course, was winning over the fans, who had about the same reaction to the idea of a teenage Batman as Bruce Timm did initially, which was a pass. Over 20 years after its premiere, fans are clamoring for a live-action Batman Beyond, and they accept Terry McGinnis as Batman. So how did they make the Batman no one asked for into a hit? Just what is the story of Terry McGinnis? Bruce Timm and the gang were looking to make a clear distinction from the stoic Bruce Wayne. While Batman had to draw inspiration from characters like The Shadow and Zorro, McGinnis's Batman benefited from decades of comics that had come since then. The biggest change, obviously, was the age and station of the hero. While Bruce spent his teenage years wandering the world, learning punching and kicking and detecting and tailoring for that sweet batsuit, Terry took on the cowl as a teenager. He also lacked Bruce's deep pockets. In this regard, McGinnis shared more in common with Spider-Man than Batman. There's plenty of that Bat DNA in there. The story starts 2 years ago, when a Batman 20 years on from the animated series starts to finally feel all those years of crime fighting. Despite a modern, advanced suit to pick up the slack where his body is letting him down, he suffers a minor heart attack during an encounter and resorts to using a dropped gun to force an attacker to run away. Having crossed an uncrossable line for the man orphaned by a gun-toting mugger, Batman hung up the bat ears for good. Jumping ahead another 20 years, and it turns out, when the Bat's away, Gotham is gonna play. While most of Bat's marquee villains also went in for retirement or were retired, Gotham continued down its downward spiral, but now with a cyberpunk sheen to it, with corporations behaving as bad as people in weird costumes. This is the world Terry McGinnis grows up in, eventually joining a street gang before deciding that wasn't the life for him. Not that gangs were done with him, though, especially a gang based around Gotham's most famous baddie, the Jokers. A group of Jokers take off after Terry when he tries to do the right thing. On the run, he finds himself on the grounds of a reclusive rich guy with a surly Great Dane and a mysterious past. Oh, come on, it's not that mysterious. Even with an old man voice, we'd recognize Kevin Conroy's baritone anywhere. McGinnis has accidentally sought shelter in the lair of the Dark Knight. Wayne had fallen out of practice guarding his secret after discovering grumpy old man keeps people away just fine, so McGinnis is able to sort out his secret while hiding from the Jokers. When he finally gets home, he gets the full Luke Skywalker experience. His home has been attacked, his father murdered, his house ransacked, and Jokers graffiti everywhere. But just like it wasn't the Sand People that killed the Barus, it wasn't the Jokers that killed Terry's father. Terry's dad had discovered some shady dealings by his boss, Derek Powers, who now ran Wayne Powers. Who better to solve this than Batman? When Bruce doesn't appear to be interested, even after finding out that Powers was illegally selling poison gas, Terry jumps into the Batsuit and takes Batman out of retirement. After a moment with the remote shutoff and some impassioned pleading, Bruce reluctantly signs on to become the man in the chair for the new Batman, Terry McGinnis. More than just the stiff upper lip and biting wit of Alfred, Wayne also has the task of training his young protege. He's still sharp as ever, it's just that his body has had enough of taking Gotham's worst on the chin. During his time fighting crime in Gotham, McGinnis fought familiar faces with future upgrades like Mr. Freeze and the Royal Flush Gang, as well as new villains like Ink and the eventually irradiated Powers. Batman got future upgrades as well. The Batmobile started elbowing into the Batwing's territory by flying, because if we keep predicting a future with flying cars, we might finally get flying cars. Any day now. Not that Terry needed a flying Batmobile, because the Batsuit got into the flying game itself. Acting a bit like an Iron Man suit, the Batsuit could fly, was armored, and enhanced Terry's strength and reflexes. And of course, the usual raft of sensors and bat gadgets. Also, even though Gotham is a city of shadows, having to run from one shadow to another to do that whole emerging from nowhere thing is a bit of a pain, so the suit was able to turn invisible too. Eventually, the Joker was able to return, because of course he would. He did it by loading his consciousness onto a chip and then cloning the Robin he killed, Jason Todd. Because the Joker is cruel. Turns out, the Joker isn't ready to fight someone who's just as willing to banter during a fight. In an epilogue that was part of Justice League Unlimited, we find out that Terry McGinnis being Batman wasn't a coincidence. Or the biggest coincidence ever, depending on where you stand. It turns out that Amanda Waller of Argus and Suicide Squad fame had decided that having a Batman was so important, she wasn't going to leave things to fate. So she cloned some of the DNA that Batman left around town from all the punches to the face and snuck that DNA into an unsuspecting couple's upcoming child. That child, of course, was Terry McGinnis. She even arranged to have his parents murdered in front of him to activate his full Batman before she thought that was too far even for her. Amanda Waller has limits. Who knew? Just like how Harley Quinn started life in the animated show and worked her way into the regular continuity of the comic books, Terry McGinnis has also made his way into the four-color world of comic books. Earths 12 and 992 both have a Terry McGinnis in them waiting to take over the mantle, and in Batman number 700, McGinnis joined the main DC universe as a Batman in waiting. McGinnis' adventures on the printed page have been by and large the same as those on the TV screen. He continued to have a difficult time maintaining that superhero life and a teenage life, including with his girlfriend Dana Tan. Gotham continues to be Gotham, you know, the usual stuff. Like the animated McGinnis, he's asked to join the Justice League, but Bruce advises against it. He also gets a visit from a few Batman's blasts from the past, both friend and foe. He finds out why he doesn't have a cape anymore. The cape originally was a tool of both intimidation and misdirection, creating enough of a distraction for people aiming deadly things at him. Unfortunately, it worked so well that someone shot through Batman's cape and caught Dick Grayson off guard, catching 3 bullets himself and losing an eye. In another time, in another situation, Terry wouldn't have gone straight to the Batsuit. He would have gotten the green tights and red vest of a Robin, and Grayson was there to tell him that being Robin is a terrible job. Batman is where it's at. He also ran into Batman's old childhood pal and adult jerk, Hush. Hush was going about killing former Bat-related figures, as you do, only it's not the Hush that Bruce knew, but instead a clone of Dick Grayson that happens to be angrier than actual Dick Grayson, who's actually pretty mad. Bat-wraiths are reprogrammed, Terry and Bruce argue a lot, a new Catwoman who's been working with Hush swaps sides, as she does, and eventually Dick Grayson/Hush gets kicked down a hole like Gotham was Sparta and ends up impaled on a Bat-wraith and blown up. Because teenage Batman is just as dark or darker than regular age Batman.